My name is Rosemary Bennett, I'm 63 years old, and I'm going to tell you the story of how my own daughter, into whom I poured all my maternal love, began to treat me as if I were nothing. I lived most of my life in a poor neighborhood in Phoenix, toiling in other people's homes from the age of 14, scrubbing floors and washing laundry, just to survive. When I became a single mother, I made a vow to myself, my daughter would never know the hardship that had befallen me. We didn't have a penny to our name, no luxuries whatsoever, but we had a heart ready to give everything to the last drop. And I gave. I gave everything without reservation. From the very day I found out I was carrying her, my world began to revolve around her. I named her Abigail because she became my very soul, the ray of light that gave me the strength to live each day. Her father ran away from us as soon as he found out about the pregnancy and never showed up again. But I didn't shed a tear. I rolled up my sleeves and took on 2 shifts at the laundromat. My belly grew, but so did my determination. I transformed into a strong, unyielding, yet loving woman for my girl. And when Abigail was born, I felt that all my sacrifices had not been in vain. Though we didn't have a crib, I warmed her with my own warmth, covering her with my body. Despite the lack of formula, I tried my best to eat right so I could breastfeed her. Exhaustion came in waves, but I never allowed myself to complain. Every morning, looking at her peacefully sleeping little face, I made a vow to myself, one day she would get an education, she would have her own home filled with happiness. I never managed to get an education myself, but she definitely would. It was my most cherished dream, my guiding star. Years passed, and in sweat, with calluses on my hands and scraped knees from endlessly scrubbing floors, I raised her, my Abigail. Every school uniform, bought with the last of my money, left me practically without a salary, but filled my heart with pride. Abigail grew up to be smart, excelled in her studies, and her smile, that smile disarmed everyone around her. Teachers never tired of repeating what a well-mannered and talented girl she was. I smiled in response, but inside me bubbled a feeling of invincibility. I couldn't have imagined that over time this radiant smile would turn into a grimace of contempt, but more on that later. Abigail grew up in love, albeit in the shadow of my sacrifices, which she, of course, didn't notice. While her classmates enjoyed yogurts and fresh fruits, I packed her tortillas with salt and reheated beans from the morning. But she never lacked the most important thing, my love and care. Love. Care. A mother willing to do anything for her daughter. I remember standing near the high school, selling jelly just to buy her new shoes that were required at school. And if there was a field trip planned, I would spend nights rolling tamales to pay for the trip. Every peso that came into our house was meant for Abigail. I forgot about new clothes for myself, and my shoes were held together by sheer will and tape. I was ashamed to appear in public in that state, but the thought of my daughter needing something hurt much more. As soon as Abigail got sick, even if it was just a common cold, I rushed her to the nearest clinic, paying no attention to the rain and wind. She was my treasure, the light of my life. And the only thing I dreamed of was hearing her say one day, when she grew up, "Thank you, Mom." But when she entered high school, a wall seemed to grow between us. She no longer hugged me in front of her friends and started calling me Rosemary instead of the usual Mom. The first time I heard it, I felt like I had been doused with ice water. A void formed in my chest, as if I had fallen into an abyss. I naively believed that it was just teenage rebellion, a temporary phase that she would outgrow. I convinced myself that it was normal, but as time went on, the situation only worsened. One day, I accidentally overheard her contemptuously telling a friend that I was just a cleaning lady, as if it were a mark of shame. As if she had forgotten who provided her with a roof over her head, food on the table, the opportunity to study, and clean clothes to wear every day. I locked myself in the bathroom, and silent sobs shook me. But wiping away the tears, I felt not anger, but rather wounded pride. Even if Abigail doesn't appreciate it, I know how much I've done for her. And no one can take that away from me. When Abigail graduated from high school, I insisted on her going to university. "Don't worry about anything," I said, "I'll take care of everything, as always." She just nodded indifferently, without a trace of gratitude, as if it were not our common achievement, but my sacred duty. To pay for her education, I sold my washing machine. Now I washed by hand, in an old cement sink. My hands reddened, my nails broke, my back ached, but my heart remained strong. She will become a professional. I must live to see that moment. I'm just compelled to see her succeed. There were days when I went without food just so Abigail would have a packed lunch. I walked home from work, saving every penny I could to avoid the bus fare. But I never uttered a word of complaint. My soul ached far more than my body. My heart broke every evening when I came home and caught Abigail looking at me as if I were a ghost. We stopped having heart-to-hearts. She no longer shared her thoughts with me. I had become just a woman who cooks, cleans, and silently leaves money on the table. When she introduced me to her boyfriend, there wasn't a hint of enthusiasm in her voice. His name was Ethan, a young man exuding arrogance and conceit. From the first glance, I noticed how he looked at me with disdain, as if he saw right through me, as if he was ashamed of his girlfriend's humble mother. And the worst part was seeing that Abigail didn't even try to defend me. On the contrary, it seemed she wanted to hide me, as if I were a shameful stain on her perfect life. One night, I unintentionally overheard them whispering in the living room. Ethan hissed, "Your mother is holding you back, preventing you from growing. If it weren't for her, you'd be on a different level by now." And Abigail didn't object, only kept a painful silence. This silence stung more than any blow because I realized the terrible truth. In her eyes, I was no longer a mother, but just an annoying obstacle to get rid of as soon as possible. For the first time, I doubted whether my love was enough. On Abigail's university graduation day, I seemed to be the only mother not flaunting a new hairstyle and dress. I came in my modest but carefully ironed clothes, in worn-out sandals bought a size too big. The luxury of new shoes was beyond my means. I modestly settled in the last row of the hall, trying not to attract attention, and furtively wiped away tears of pride that overwhelmed me. But she never once looked in my direction. Not a single photo together, as if I didn't exist at all, as if I wasn't the reason she was holding that coveted diploma in her hands. After the ceremony, gathering the remnants of my courage, I approached her with a trembling smile and held out my arms for a hug. She only lightly touched my shoulders and whispered in an icy tone, "Don't make a scene here, Rosemary." And I trudged home alone, swallowing sobs, like a broken record, repeating to myself, "One day she'll understand. One day she'll appreciate everything I've done for her." But that day never dawned. Instead, just a few months later, she stunned me with the news. She was moving in with Ethan, and it was time for me to find a new place to live. She said it casually, as if I were just a temporary lodger. She argued that they needed personal space, that I had already played my part, and now it was her turn to build her life. No help, no share of the rent, no slightest hint of an alternative, just the door. The door of the house that I had built with my own hands, the house where she grew up, slammed right in my face. And the worst thing was, there wasn't a trace of remorse in her eyes. In silence, I gathered my belongings, an old suitcase, a few changes of clothes, and a black and white photo where she was 3 years old, and she, tiny, hugged me with her little hands. I went to rent a room in a wretched housing complex, with a shared toilet and the possibility of heating coffee on someone else's stove. That night, I fell asleep with my eyes wide open, feeling as if a piece of flesh had been torn from my soul. Because poverty is one thing, but ingratitude, that's a completely different pain, sharper than hunger. The first days in this apartment building were heavy with silence and gloom. I was a stranger, and any communication seemed an unbearable burden. Huddled on the bed, I stared at the dilapidated walls, and every corner of the abandoned house painfully surfaced in my memory. There were no tears, not because it didn't hurt, but because everything had been cried out. I felt like a shadow, old, exhausted, aimless. But the days went by, and I began to come to life. I got a job as a cleaner in a small cafe. The pay was meager, but it was enough for hot food and modest savings. Every day, before dawn, I swept, mopped floors, and washed down loneliness with scalding, thin coffee brewed in an old roaster. No one knew my past. No one guessed that this woman washing dishes was the mother of a university student. And that brought some relief. The pain becomes easier when you don't have to explain it. One day, a neighbor, Agnes, spoke to me. An 80-year-old woman with a cloud of gray hair. In the evenings, she put out her old plastic chair for me to rest, and shared stale bread that we softened in milk. We didn't exchange many words, but her mere presence served as a quiet reminder that the world is not without kind people. One day, she timidly asked if I had children. I was silent for a long time, as if gathering my courage. And when I finally squeezed out an answer, all that came out was, there was one. She didn't ask any more questions. She just took my hand in hers and squeezed it tightly, motherly. This simple gesture, filled with compassion, seemed to whisper to me that life doesn't fall apart just because someone leaves you, that I still have myself, even if I am wounded. And at that moment, in that ringing silence shared with a strange elderly woman, I vowed to myself, even if no one else sees value in me, I will find the strength to rise, because no one taught me to give up. I had been used to fighting since childhood, and now, despite the pain tearing me apart, I will fight for myself, for my future. One day, when I was scrubbing the floors in the cafe, a girl walked in. She was wearing a blouse exactly like the one I gave Abigail for her 18th birthday. Nostalgia hit me suddenly, like a slap in the face. Frozen with a rag in my hand, I felt my eyes fill with tears. For a moment, I wanted to run away, to hide from the overwhelming feelings, but I took a deep breath and continued to mop the floor. Such is the fate of a forgotten mother. You have to learn to live with a broken heart. Memories haunted me like long, ominous shadows. Abigail taking her first steps, Abigail saying I love you for the first time, Abigail writing me a touching letter on colored paper, calling me her heroine. Where is the line after which all this disappeared? At what point did I stop being her safe haven and become a burden? This question tormented me every night as I lay on the hard mattress and looked at the cracked ceiling. And although the pain tore me apart inside, I didn't look for answers, I just wanted to continue living, to breathe. One day, one of the cooks got sick, and I was asked to replace her. I cooked as if for my own family, as I once cooked Abigail's favorite dish for her birthday. I put a piece of my love into every movement. The customers were delighted. The owner gave me a sincere smile and said that I had excellent taste. In her words, I felt a glimmer of hope. That night, I walked into my room, my hands still smelling of garlic and onions, and a timid but long-awaited feeling of satisfaction warmed my chest. For the first time in forever, someone saw something good in me. It dawned on me that even though the world had turned away, I could still give something. My calloused hands, it turns out, are still capable of giving love through food. My voice, though quiet, can still sing melodies while I wash dishes. And my dignity, badly battered by life, is still intact. We, people who have risen from the bottom, know what it is to fall. To fall many times. But we always, you hear, always find the strength to rise. Even if we are all alone. Even if our soul is broken into pieces. I remember one bleak January morning, I was sweeping the porch of the cafe when an elderly woman stumbled on the sidewalk. My heart told me to, and without hesitation, I rushed to her. I took her arm and helped her to a chair. Her eyes showed fatigue, but her voice was surprisingly gentle. She thanked me with a quiet smile and admitted that she had become unaccustomed to selfless help. I just nodded, feeling a lump in my throat, and offered her a cup of hot tea. That's how my story with Beatrice began. She started coming to the cafe almost every day. Always alone. Always silent. Little by little, we started talking. She told me about her life in a huge, tomb-like house. Her husband had long since passed away, and her children, having scattered to distant lands, seemed to have forgotten about her existence. I understood her pain more acutely than I wanted to admit to myself. We are both elderly women, like ghosts, existing on the fringes of the world, clinging to the fragments of a former soul. Without a word, we became each other's outlet. One day she timidly asked if I cooked for myself. I smiled sadly, admitting that I didn't even have a home. Tears welled up in her eyes. She squeezed my hand tightly and said that she needed a person, not just a servant, but a loyal friend and housekeeper. I agreed, but on the condition that I would continue to work half a day in the cafe so as not to lose my modest income. She just smiled warmly and said, "Do what brings you a sense of purpose, Rosemary." So I started spending my evenings at her house. It resembled an old museum, filled with portraits and the scent of old wood. I cooked dinner, told funny stories, and she, in turn, read me poetry in her quiet, trembling voice. Sometimes we just remained silent, immersed in the sounds of 70s music. We didn't need extra words. In her company, I found a peace that I hadn't known for many years, and although I didn't say it out loud, I felt that she, too, drew a little comfort from me. Weeks flew by, turning into months, and my evenings with Beatrice became an integral part of my life. Every evening she waited for me with a cup of fragrant cinnamon tea and a radiant smile. She would ask how my day at the cafe was, and invariably comment on how nicely my hair smelled of soap. Sometimes I would simply wander into her living room to watch her silently as she sat engrossed in reading, wearing her large glasses and cozy wool robe. It was as if I had gained a grandmother, or perhaps a mother, who embraced me with just a glance. One day, while I was wiping down the display case in her little shop, she suddenly said that I reminded her of her younger sister, who had passed away too soon. "You should have been part of my family," she said in a quiet, trembling voice, as if the thought had long resided in her heart. I laughed awkwardly and confessed that I essentially had no family either, that my only daughter no longer wanted to communicate with me. She gently took my face in her hands, her gaze filled with compassion and warmth, and said, "Then we shall both, two lonely souls, adopt each other." In her eyes, I saw hope and sincere love, and I felt something warm spread through my soul. And at that moment, I was overwhelmed by a feeling I had long forgotten, a sense of belonging. Beatrice patiently taught me how to operate her old oven, generously shared the secrets of her signature cookies, and even entrusted me with her well-read volumes, filled with her youthful annotations. In a worn notebook, my own entries began to appear, as if life itself was imploring me not to give up. I caught myself smiling, absent-mindedly humming as I stirred the sauce. No longer just survival, but a tentative return to life. One quiet Thursday evening, as we were watering the flowers, Beatrice uttered words that sent a chill down my spine. "Rosemary, I have already lived my life. I have no one left. And if something should happen to me, I want you to know, you will receive everything I leave behind." I was speechless. My legs trembled betrayingly, not from the anticipation of wealth, but from the realization that someone, for the first time, considered me worthy of being an heir. Not by duty, not by blood, but simply because I am a good person. Beatrice passed away quietly on a Sunday at dawn. The nurse informed me, barely holding back tears over the phone. In my apron, still smelling of cilantro, I stood as if petrified. My hands, still holding the aroma of herbs, hung limply in the air. Sinking onto the sidewalk outside the cafe, I couldn't utter a word for a long time. Tears didn't flow immediately. The pain was so all-consuming that it felt like emptiness, as if someone had mercilessly torn out my soul. That night, I wandered aimlessly to her house. Settling into her favorite rocking chair, where she spent evenings with a book, I burst into tears. Tears flowed like blood, gushing from a gaping wound. A few days later, a call came from the notary's office. Vaguely understanding why I was needed there, I went anyway. There, I was handed a copy of the will. My name, Rosemary Bennett, was written in elegant script as the sole heir. It was unbelievable. The house with the adjacent plot, the accounts, her beloved books, all of it was meant for me. My hands trembled, but not from the anticipation of wealth, but from the realization of her generous gesture. For the first time in my life, someone had trusted me so much that they left me an entire world. I didn't know what to do, laugh, cry, or fall to my knees in gratitude. This money didn't make me a socialite on a magazine cover, but it gave me freedom. I bought new clothes, finally visited the dentist, got a stylish haircut, and was even able to afford my own apartment, instead of a room in a dormitory. I settled into a cozy apartment. Mustard curtains, a stove without sparks, for the first time in a long time, my sleep was peaceful. The windows were open, and my heart was at peace. No debts, no excuses. There was no longer the feeling that I was worse than others. Cafe. I didn't need it anymore, but I continued to visit once a week, to help out. You know, when you crawl out from the bottom, you never forget where you came from. And I, even though there were now zeros on my account that I never dreamed of, remained the same Rosemary who washed floors for her daughter. The only difference was that now I didn't expect anything from anyone. No call, no gratitude, nothing. I learned that giving yourself completely means knowing how to pick yourself up piece by piece on your own. One day, on a March morning, as I was conjuring up coffee in my new kitchen, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it. Abigail was on the doorstep. In expensive clothes, dark glasses, and with the same signature expression, a mixture of fake love and arrogance. I froze not so much from her appearance as from the audacity with which she appeared before me. "Hello, Rosemary," sounded so ordinary, as if nothing had happened between us. As if it wasn't she who had thrown me out of my own house, as if a greeting could wash away the blood of grievances. She asked if she could come in. I just nodded, bound by politeness, but every cell in my body tensed. She sat down in my living room, like a rightful owner, surveying the furniture, the curtains, inhaling the familiar scent of sandalwood. "You look good," sounded almost with surprise. I remained silent, only pouring her coffee, out of habit, like I used to when she was a little girl. She clasped the cup with both hands, staring at me as if I were a ghost from the past. And then she dropped the bomb. "I came to say I'm not angry with you anymore." I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from laughing. "Angry?" She gave me a pathetic smile and added, "I know it hurt you that I left, but I needed to build my own life." And then, as if casually, she threw me a question, "And how did you manage to get so well settled?" I was silent, although I could have told her about my job, about the good people I had met along the way, about how her absence had taught me to survive without humiliating myself before anyone. I saw her flinch. She clearly didn't expect me to make it without her help. It was unbearable for her to realize that I no longer needed her. Before leaving, she confessed that she was going through difficult times, that Ethan had left her and that she was thinking of coming back and starting with a clean slate. I wanted to ask if I was this clean slate, but I just looked at her silently, my eyes dry, and my soul calm. I offered her to finish her coffee, and as she took the last sip, I quietly said, "There is no room here for resentment or lies anymore." She left without even saying goodbye, and in the ensuing silence, I suddenly realized something wonderful. I don't owe her anything anymore. Not even tears. Only 3 days passed, and Abigail was standing on my doorstep again. This time, her voice had an undisguised sweetness, almost fake. She said she had been thinking a lot, that she missed our conversations, our lunches together, our laughter. I listened to her, trying to remain calm. Not because her words sounded convincing, but because there were no memories in her eyes, only some anxiety that felt like a slight unease. She asked if she could stay for a while. She said that she was currently living with a friend, but it was temporary. I understood her motives. She was looking for a backup plan. I looked at her carefully. The daughter who had once left, calling me the cause of her discomfort, had now returned with a request, but without remorse, with a need, but without a hint of embarrassment. I said she could only stay for one night. I prepared the sofa and put on fresh linen. We hadn't finished eating when she started talking about what was bothering her. "Mom, you got something, didn't you? It's noticeable." I coughed from a sip of tea. She asked directly, without delicacy, as if I were obliged to report. I answered her confidently. What I own, I acquired, and what I received, I accepted with honor. She just looked away, but I knew she wouldn't give up that easily. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept listening to her movements around the house, her breathing, her quiet sounds, not out of fear, but because my inner feeling had already recognized this type of personality, a person who comes not to enrich, but to cut back. And then I realized that Abigail had arrived not to reunite with her mother. She had arrived to regain an advantage, to try to ingratiate herself with me, and then make a request. But this time I was no longer the Rosemary I used to be. The next morning, Abigail woke up showing a semblance of well-being. She made me a drink, smiled like an attentive daughter, but her words sounded too deliberate, as if each sentence had been pre-thought before being spoken. She talked about the difficulties of life, about high prices, about the difficulties that arose after breaking up with Ethan. I listened to her without interrupting, while preparing breakfast. Deep down, I already foresaw where the conversation was headed. Finally, she decided to speak out. "Mom, I didn't ask you to be a single parent. It was your choice. I think it's unfair that you now judge me for the fact that our paths diverged. I also have the right to my own life." I froze. Not from sharp pain, but rather from the realization that these were the words I had subconsciously expected to hear. They left an unpleasant aftertaste, but did not cause tears. Rather, it caused a feeling of inner disagreement, but not in the form of anger, but rather with a sense of self-worth. I put down the cup and calmly replied, "You're right. You didn't ask to be born, but I didn't ask to be treated as if my feelings didn't matter. What I did was dictated not by a sense of obligation, but by genuine care. But care is not unconditional submission and, especially, not ignoring." Abigail was silent. She looked at me with a serious expression on her face, as if realizing that I was no longer the accommodating mother who avoided conflicts. That Rosemary was no more. There was no dinner together that evening. She preferred to stay in her room, citing the need to rest. I settled down in the room, wrapped in a blanket, and turned on the device broadcasting shows, although I was not focused on watching. My mind was preoccupied with worries that I had kept to myself for a long time, fears related to possible loneliness. But now my understanding of the situation has changed. Being alone can be less painful than maintaining a relationship with someone who only sees you as a source of support, and I felt that I could no longer provide such support to Abigail. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, tidied up the room, made myself a drink, and turned on some quiet music. Delma was still resting, as if she was in no hurry to start the day. I sat down to make notes in the notebook where I wrote down various ideas, notes, and impressions. On a new page, I wrote a simple but important statement: "I owe nothing to someone who is no longer interested in my feelings." I highlighted it, and at that moment I felt relief. When she finally came out of the room, I offered her food. She refused. She looked confused, as if she felt that I had made some decision. I asked her to sit down to discuss the situation. She looked at me with doubt. I calmly told her that we should live separately, that if she needed support, there were various organizations, resources, acquaintances, but my personal life and peace of mind required changes. I spoke calmly, without reproach, in the same voice that I had tried to support her with for many years. Abigail expressed her disagreement. She said that I was not being very good, that she was offended. She said that she was surprised that after everything we had been through together, I was not ready for further cohabitation. But this was not the first attempt to improve the situation, but rather another one. And the previous ones did not bring the desired result. This time I was determined. I looked at her with regret, but without guilt, and said that relationships are not an endless obligation, and if she could not appreciate what was, then it is now difficult to change anything. She left, slamming the door loudly. She left no words, no sign of attention, only a slight aroma of her perfume was still felt in the room. I closed the door, as if completing a certain stage that had dragged on. I sat down, took a sip of my cool drink, and tried to calm down. For the first time in many years, I felt that the house had really become mine, not formally, but because it now houses a person who no longer feels anxious about solitude, a person who has learned to set boundaries. After Abigail's departure, the silence in the house did not cause me unpleasant sensations. On the contrary, it created a feeling of comfort. I cooked my favorite dishes, listened to music that I liked, and even decided to change the color of one wall to light blue. This was the first time that I was decorating a space exclusively for myself, not for others, but for myself. Every element of this house began to reflect my preferences. And my inner state, which often went unnoticed, finally found a place to recover. One morning, while taking care of the plants, I received a call from a representative of Beatrice's law firm. She reported that, in addition to the house and financial assets, there was a plot of land outside the city, which was also registered in my name. It was difficult for me to realize this, not because of a misunderstanding of the information, but because I did not expect such attention to myself. I received an offer to sell this land, but first I wanted to see it. It was a plot surrounded by trees, with a pleasant view and fresh air. It was there that I made an important decision. To create a small house for women in difficult life situations, for those who have given a lot of strength and resources and need support. This will be a place where dignity is valued. I wanted other women who had gone through similar experiences to know that they are not alone, that their lives continue, even if they face difficulties in relationships with loved ones. We, those who have dedicated ourselves to caring for others, deserve a decent life. So I began to deal with the paperwork, consult with specialists, and make plans. Each step strengthened my confidence in myself. I felt full of energy. I was full of energy, and with each new building on this site, I felt my life filling with new meaning, despite all the difficulties. Because life, although not immediately, often rewards us for what we do with sincere care. When we opened our center, I invited a few people, only those who supported me without criticizing. Agnes was one of the first to come, leaning on her cane decorated with flowers, and with a welcoming smile. "You created this, Rosemary," she said to me with shining eyes. I just nodded, although inside me it was still hard to believe. In the corner of our garden, I placed a plaque with the inscription, "For all those who have shown care and faced misunderstanding." It was my quiet reminder of the many people who found themselves in a difficult situation, like me. Soon after that, I looked carefully in the mirror. I wasn't looking for signs of age. I was looking for a person who had been through a lot. I saw myself changed, more confident, stronger, with the face of someone who no longer needed approval. I bought clothes that I liked, not just what was available. I visited a salon and asked for a hairstyle that reflected my freedom. The young stylist who attended to me smiled, perhaps not fully understanding, but did it with care. I felt renewed, and it was connected to self-respect. At the market, I was no longer approached with pity. Now I was greeted with sympathy. Some knew my story, others just knew I had made it. I didn't go into detail, not out of arrogance, but because I realized I didn't need to explain my well-being. If they asked about Abigail, I simply said, "She's fine, but she's far away." And I changed the subject, because I didn't need to talk about the difficulties to remember them, but I also wasn't going to let them influence the future. Moments of solitude still happened. Yes, but they no longer evoked sadness. They were part of my life, like morning coffee and tidiness in the house. Sometimes the desire to know about Abigail arose, but I stopped myself because I realized one important thing. It's not always necessary to keep searching. I had already given a lot of warmth, and now that warmth was returning to me. And I, watching her leave, understood that I had made an important decision. For the first time, putting myself first. 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. One Sunday afternoon she reappeared at my door. This time she was more agitated, with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice that didn't quite convince me. "Mom," she said to me, "why are you so mean to me? Why are you pushing me away?" I was silent for a few seconds. I didn't know what to think, because what I saw in her eyes wasn't suffering, but a restrained discontent that arises when things don't go as one wants. She sat down without waiting for my invitation, and began to talk about how I had raised her too strictly, that she had never known what it meant to live freely. That if she left, it was because she felt obligated to a mother who never asked her if she wanted to bear that debt. She said that I made her feel guilty for being who she was. She told me that I had decided to give birth to her and now behaved as if she were eternally in debt. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You became a mother by your own choice, not because of me." Her words stung me. Of course, they stung, but they didn't break me. I replied calmly. You owe me nothing, Abigail, and I owe you nothing either. What I did was because I felt warm feelings for you. But those feelings, my daughter, don't obligate, don't blackmail, don't demand gratitude by force, but only wait for respect, and that's the only thing you haven't given me. She looked away, pursed her lips. She knew she had nothing to say to me. Because it's one thing not to feel like being grateful, and quite another to disrespect someone who has shown care. Before leaving, she said to me what she thought would be her strongest retort, well, if you don't care, forget I exist. Don't look for me when I'm alone. I looked at her with sadness and replied, I lost you long before this, I'm just finally accepting it now. She slammed the door angrily, but this time I didn't have a lump in my throat. This time I felt free. Because sometimes saying goodbye to someone you care about is also saying hello to the world. After that last visit, I didn't hear from Abigail again, no call, no message, no apology. And I didn't look for her, not out of pride, but because I realized that continuing to insist is a quiet form of attention-seeking, and I didn't want that kind of relationship anymore. I started writing my story in an old notebook I found among Beatrice's things. Every night, in firm handwriting, I wrote about everything I had been silent about, the efforts, the neglect, the moments when I fell asleep in silence, trying not to disturb anyone. One day, a journalist who knew about the shelter asked me for an interview. I told her my story without embellishment. I spoke about my daughter not as someone negative, but as a consequence of the circumstances in which people are raised. I also spoke about the thousands of women like me who put a lot of effort into raising children and end up facing indifference. This interview received a wide response, and something inside me also changed. Letters and messages started arriving, and women came to the shelter just to say to me, I'm like Rosemary too. Some shared their experiences with emotion, others sought comfort. I understood that my challenges were not isolated, and that sharing them could be beneficial. If my experience can help others feel connected, then it gains significance. For the first time, my past transformed from a source of difficulty into something meaningful. That evening, I lit a candle in the courtyard's small place of reflection. I spoke, expressing gratitude. I said, thank you for helping me persevere during difficult times. Thank you for connecting me with others who, like myself, have much to offer. And as the candle glowed gently, I realized something profound. My narrative is now about renewal, not setbacks. And the story was still unfolding. One morning, as the flowers in the courtyard began to blossom, I received a letter with no return address. It was from Abigail. I opened it carefully, without anticipation. She wrote that she was living elsewhere, facing hardships, and rebuilding her life. She shared her experiences with challenges, mentioning jobs with limited compensation and individuals who didn't fully appreciate her. She expressed that she now understood the feeling of facing adversity independently, acknowledging that perhaps my perspective had merit from the start, but the word apology was absent. Not even once. I carefully examined the entire message. I didn't experience strong emotions, instead, a sense of quiet resolution settled over me, as if the past had granted me closure. I chose not to respond, not out of unwillingness, but because further communication seemed unnecessary. Sometimes, unspoken understanding conveys more than any amount of words. I placed the message carefully in the container holding my journals, some older images, and the handcrafted item I made in anticipation of her arrival. Not as a sentimental gesture, but as a reminder, recognizing that complete erasure isn't essential for moving forward. It's simply about learning to release. Later that day, I met with the group and shared the situation. I explained that while I held no animosity toward my daughter, I also wasn't going to re-establish the previous dynamic. Extending understanding doesn't always necessitate returning to the prior situation, I explained. Sometimes, it simply means progressing forward without being burdened by what is no longer part of our journey. Several people acknowledged me with appreciation, not necessarily for my words, but perhaps because they perceived sincerity in my expression, a sense of inner strength gained through personal challenges. That night, lying in bed, I gazed at the ceiling and felt, for the first time, a sense of emotional freedom from past obligations, a release from connections to individuals from different periods of my life. I closed my eyes and resolved to avoid seeking affection in situations where motivations might be different, understanding that even a caregiver has the right to protect themselves from those who cause pain, regardless of the nature of their relationship. Today, at 63, I can say I live with a sense of tranquility. I don't require grand gestures, public acclaim, or delayed expressions of regret. I have a garden where I cultivate flowers, mirroring the patient care I give to my inner well-being. I have a safe space where others facing similar experiences can find support. I value solitude when desired and companionship when needed. I am not waiting for a specific outcome or person. I feel a sense of contentment. I find joy in many things, which feels significant for someone who has experienced considerable loss while maintaining inner strength. Occasionally, I am asked if I wish for Abigail to return, perhaps expressing regret and offering a sincere embrace. To be honest, I am uncertain. I no longer anticipate such an event. I have learned to navigate life without expectations that caused me pain. I've come to understand that affection cannot be pleaded for, demanded, or even hoped for in desperation. I value myself enough to not accept less than complete affection from anyone, including my own daughter. My days are now uncomplicated, yet fulfilling. I awaken to the sounds of birds. I enjoy my coffee from a cup gifted by one of the residents of the community center, and I feel gratitude for being alive. For many, true success is not about possessing everything, but about persevering when others doubted us. This I accomplished quietly, without recognition, simply with resilience and a strengthened spirit. This is my account, the narrative of Rosemary Bennett, a woman who cared for children independently, who experienced neglect, who faced disapproval, but who never surrendered. If anyone feels that their life has lost meaning, let them look at this corner of the world, where I began a new chapter. Because if I've learned anything, it's that it's never too late to start over. Even if you feel broken, there is always a chance to rebuild.